it is like a symphony of contributions from so many people that are all playing their kind of instrument just the right way, that where it all kind of comes together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Devers, and this is Clever. Today, I'm talking to John Christakos, CEO and co-founder of Blu Dot. Blu Dot is a beloved and award-winning modern furniture design and manufacturing company built on a mission to create beautiful, useful, and affordable furniture that enriches people's lives. Based in Minneapolis and founded in 1997 by John, along with Charlie Lazar and Maurice Blanks, Blu Dot is known for blending innovation with quality to create contemporary, accessible, and well-crafted pieces. Their products range from sleek sofas and chairs to distinctive lighting and storage solutions, often characterized by minimalist forms, thoughtful details, and a playful, irreverent sensibility. Blu Dot has received widespread praise for their commitment to high-quality design at reasonable price points and have earned impressive accolades, including a 2018 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for product design. Under John's leadership, Blu Dot has grown into a globally recognized brand that has reshaped how modern furniture is created and sold. With a keen sense for scaling operations and creating exceptional customer experiences, John has overseen Blu Dot's expansion into a dynamic retail presence, with standalone stores in major cities, as well as a thriving e-commerce platform and a large network of independent retailers. The company's ability to combine artistic vision with commercial success reflects John's distinctive blend of creativity and business expertise. Prior to Blu Dot, John graduated from Williams College with a double major in studio art and economics, honed his business acumen as a consultant with Bain & Company, and later earned an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Throughout his career, John has also demonstrated an active commitment to the arts and design community, serving for over 13 years on the board of trustees at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, among other contributions. Blu Dot is known for making modern design warm and approachable without compromising on style, quality, or integrity. And as you'll hear, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Here's John.
My name's John Christakos. I am talking to you today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Blu Dot, and we are designers and makers of modern furnishings. I think I've always been a builder of sorts or a maker of sorts from the time I was little. My mom was an artist, potter mostly, or a ceramicist mostly. Then my dad was an entrepreneur. So yeah, I spent a lot of time in the basement in her studio, and I spent my afternoons working in my dad's factory and watching him build a business. So Blu Dot is a little bit of a combination of those two things in some ways.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York in a little town called Cazenovia, like the Finger Lakes area.
Okay. And so you were supported, I guess, in the arts because your family was entrepreneurial, but also artistic. So there was appreciation and support for that growing up.
Totally. Yeah. They were always encouraging. I mean, I think about like even Christmases when I was probably 8 or 9, like some of my favorite presents were sketchbooks and markers and colored pencils and, art supplies, basically. No, and I think I had a grandfather who had an amazing workshop, and I would go hang out with him, and we would go down to the wood shop and make, little sailboats or make projects together. So
yeah, that's so cool.
Grew up around that too.
So it sounds like wood and clay were very present, and sketchbooks and markers. Were you also painting, and what were you doing in the rope factory? Like, I really want to hear these details of the childhood,
I was earning like $2 an hour spooling rope.
Oh, but you were getting paid.
Oh, yeah, I was getting paid. But
that's great.
Yeah, I don't think they should have had probably 13-year-olds working in there. But no, I would leave school and walk to my dad's factory and a small business and work there until he left, and then we would drive home together. So, and I get to watch that company go from 10 employees to hundreds of employees over the time from when I was maybe 12 to when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
And the pride he had in building that.
And I do want to unpack the pride a little bit, because was he also I mean, he didn't invent rope, but was like there a pride of craftsmanship in this, or was it more about the relationships and about thinking of the business as a living thing that could, if it's nurtured and cultivated, can actually grow into something that like sustains?
Yeah, I think that's really more where it came from. The content, and he wasn't passionate about rope. I mean, it just happened to be, I think, an industry that he was in previously that was why he started that company or how he ended up in that industry. My brother was also took that kind of over in some ways. And I'd say my brother was also an entrepreneur, but was for them, both of them, maybe it's more about not the game, but the sort of competition or the challenge of, winning in business and the satisfaction, I think, that comes from creating jobs and creating livelihoods and, watching something grow, basically.
Absolutely.
For me, it's about the content. Like I couldn't do that. I need, Blu Dot is really about just creating a place where I can come to work every day and do something that I love to do. And if we make a successful business in the process, great. But the content's really important, how I spend my days.
It does sound to me like very much an overlap of I'm assuming your mother was passionate about her art. So there's, and to be an artist and to create things from scratch, there's genuinely a lot of personal connection. There's a lot of emotional resonance that's sort of built into the DNA. So it sounds like you got that from your mother and then the sort of creative challenge of growing a business from your father, and you put both of them together, add a little education, and you've got the ingredients for becoming John Christakos.
It took a while. It took a while to figure those things out, right? I think when I was in college, I don't think I even knew design was a profession. So it took me, I think, being in college, I was a studio art major in college and made mostly sculpture while I was there. But being in the art building and seeing a Metropolis magazine, this is in the late 80s, and just being like, oh, and it was around the time of sort of Memphis and Ettore Satsas and I'm like flipping through the pages going like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, what is this? What is this world called design? And that's where my eyes were open to it, I think, initially. Pre-internet, obviously, like you learn these things through magazines.
Absolutely. And word of mouth, and also by stumbling into them. So that means you're a Gen Xer, correct? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. So many of Gen Xers, and I think even elder millennials, but older generations didn't understand that design was an option, that it was something you could study in school. They stumbled into it somehow, or they walked past the industrial design department at a college and was like, oh,
what's going on in there?
Yeah, what's going on in there? That might be for me. So back to your childhood, I am curious about your mother's artwork and how you would describe it now that you have a tuned sense of art. How would you describe her work?
Well, I think she wouldn't call herself she didn't go to art school, or she wouldn't like a sort of fine artist, but more of a hobbyist in some ways, but really dedicated and really talented in that regard. So pottery and ceramics were a big part of it it feels like 6-7 years. And she had a friend that introduced her to that, and they kind of worked together. They would go to art fairs and whatnot and sell their wares, but she was always kind of experimenting with kind of cool new ways of making things, and really beautiful pots and beautiful things that there's still some kicking around. She's still living, thankfully, is 93 years old.
Ooh, good genes.
She'll kill me for saying that. I hope she doesn't listen to this. But she's so youthful and so sharp. But her work is really amazing. And I'd love to get some pieces back here. More recently is more painting. So oil painting, and then she's a great watercolorist. So more landscape kind of paintings. But she's always been active. She's just kind of always been doing something. Yeah.
Nice to have that and that thread of craft running through your life. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a brother, older brother, younger brother. How many siblings?
2 older brothers. One sadly passed away, and one sister, both all older.
You're the youngest.
I'm the youngest by kind of a lot. I think I might have been an oops child, but there's a 6-year gap between me and my next eldest sibling.
What was your relationship like with your siblings?
Good. I mean, I was a lot younger. All of us went to boarding school. So I was thinking about this recently, and my sister didn't, but she was off at college, and my brothers were off. The closest brother was off at boarding school. So I was kind of an only child from probably the time I was about 8 on. They were all gone out of the house until I went away. So that was cool for me in the sense that I think my relationship with my dad was maybe different than theirs. Like we had a lot more time together, just one-on-one, that factory time, or like, he'd come in my room in the morning on a school day and be like, hey, I'm going to Rhode Island on a business trip. Do you want to come? Or going to, New England on a business trip. Do you want to come? I'm like, you mean miss school? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I want to come. So I like hop in his Ford station wagon with wood paneling and, him smoking a pack of cigarettes. And we drive to Rhode Island and visit like textile mills and people in that world, which is, Rhode Island actually is there's a lot of that down there, as you probably know.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are just awesome experiences that I think would have been harder for my siblings to have because there's just more chaos. And I think he was less settled in his career at that stage.
Yeah. Road trips with your dad does sound really cool, like bonding experience. And also being, I don't know, kind of given the keys to the world a little bit, or being let in on the whole backstory of how a business gets built, which is pretty cool.
Totally. Like he'd bring me into these sales meetings and stuff. I'd be like, I'm bringing my son along and I just get to sit there and watch and listen. And we'd stay in some like Red Roof Inn, like some crappy motel, and he liked to drink this drink called a Stinger, which is, I think, half brandy and half cream de menthe. It's awful. It tastes like Listerine. But he would go to the liquor store and get, a bottle of each, and then he'd make me run down the hall with a plastic ice bucket.
Yeah.
And, so those are really great memories.
Oh, that's nice. What about your teenage years? I mean, nobody kind of gets through teenage years completely unscathed. What were your challenges or aspirations?
They were great years, actually. I went away to boarding school in New England. I grew up in a small town, and I think my parents felt I'd get a better education there. So I went to a school called Westminster School in Simsbury, Connecticut, and a little bit hairy, being dropped off as a 15-year-old or 14-year-old. I went in 10th grade, 10th through 12th, but I'd probably say one of the most formative years of my life. And that might be for everybody at that age. I don't know. But the place was just a really cool school, really wonderful group of people. Their motto is grit and grace. And
that's really cool. Yeah.
I like that combination, and I think that's kind of like words to live by in some ways. And I think that school really lived those values. So it was a great experience. I met a small town. I mean, most of the folks there my friends were from fancier parts of Connecticut, like Darien or Greenwich, and I had places on Nantucket in the summer and went on sailboats. And, that was not our life. So it opened my eyes a little bit to just different worlds, very much a privileged world, but it was a great experience.
I know that when I went away to college, it was a sense of freedom, but that's because I was on my own and I was 17 or 18. And I've also talked to some people who went to boarding school and they have mixed feelings about it. Like they maybe have some abandonment issues that they're working through. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like you had a really strong foundation with your family because you got all that alone time. And even if you were in an accident, you still felt loved and wanted. Right. So abandonment may have not been your issue, but did boarding school feel like freedom, or did it feel like just another reality where you just didn't live under your parents' roof?
Yeah, no, it was more like a new experience, a new challenge, right? Making new friends and kind of the best of both worlds, right? You have this great new group of friends. I'm still super close to, there's a group, about 10 of us guys mostly, that still get together at least once a year, this many years later. But then I'd get to go home and all the kids I grew up with, I'd be sort of like, oh, we forgot about you. Like, you'd be the sort of fresh new face. And I'd get to go to prom in my hometown high school. So it was the best of both worlds to have two really good groups of friends.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Okay, well, you sound pretty well adjusted. We're gonna find the cracks, I promise.
Yeah, I know.
So you decided to go to Williams College and study studio art and economics. Was that a double major?
It was.
Okay. Yeah. I totally get the need to pursue something creative and also the urge to satisfy maybe a parental fear and do something a little more practical, which economics would have been considered practical. Mm-hmm. But I also think, as I look at it, tell me if I'm wrong, the process of like fully formalizing and developing your creative process at the same time that you're learning about business and the forces that make, the economies that make the world work. There's this saying that synapses that fire together wire together. And so I really like the combination of putting those two together in a young brain that's like absorbing all of this and forming a worldview with both of those in the operating simultaneously. Talk to me about how learning both of those worlds and fusing them together in your brain actually worked for you.
Well, I mean, I don't think I had that developed of a strategy when I did it, but no, and I know.
No, none of us do. This is all hindsight. Yeah,
I know it's all hindsight, but yeah, honestly, you hit on it. I mean, if I had just been a studio art major, my dad would have killed me, I think. And so economics was the practical piece and justified the tuition, I'm sure. I mean, I also had an interest in it too. I've always been strong in math, or I went to Williams thinking I was going to be pre-med, which is really like super laughable now, because I was so young that, right, when you're 18, I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'll be a doctor. Like, doctors are successful. Like, I had no interest in medicine. And I started freshman year and I took chemistry and I did fine. I took calculus, started taking all those classes. And it was more out of just a knee-jerk reaction. Like, that's what I did in high school. That's what I'm going to do in college. And it took me like a semester or two to realize, like, oh, I don't have to do this. Like, this is not my interest. So, and that's sort of the beauty of a liberal arts college, right? Is to like learn how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's why I did economics and art. And for sure, I think there's, for me, this like left brain, right brain, like interests on both sides of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And one's not sort of more dominant than the other necessarily. Those things are sometimes hard to marry up, right? I mean, I left Williams and went to work for Bain & Company as a management consultant. That's all left brain. There wasn't a ton of creativity there. So I was making sculpture in my apartment while I was working there. So I've had to satisfy these two hemispheres, like whatever, for my whole life, and until Blu Dot, really, which is when they finally kind of merged.
So many things happened at Williams, including meeting Charlie and Maurice. And then from there, I know you went on to work at Bain and then get an MBA, but there was this like pivotal backpack trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you talk about it, and I'm really interested if, when you look back on it, is that something you would 100% recommend to your own children?
100%.
Yes. Okay. So then tell me why. What was it?
Yeah. Well, one, you don't get many opportunities in life to do that, right? And that space between college and the rest of your life, right? Working life, that's an opportunity to do it. I had gotten a little small scholarship and I got a job offer at Bain, and I was stupid enough to ask if I could defer my job. I thought you could defer jobs like you defer college admission, right? And my father was like, "You did what?" Like,
That does sound crazy.
They said sure, and
what?
And yeah, and so I left on that backpacking trip having that job in hand and to come back to, which was just like the best of all worlds. So
yeah.
I guess my naivete in asking worked out in that case, but it's super formative. It's just a really amazing 12 months. About half of it, Charlie and I lived in Japan teaching English in Japan. I lived in Kyoto. He lived in Osaka. And then Maurice came over and joined us. And for the next 6 months, we backpacked through Asia, on a $15 a day budget, right? No internet.
Boy, does that sharpen your skills, though. You get so scrappy doing that.
Right. You do a let's go book and you figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. Yeah. Incredible time.
Had you traveled much before that?
Not really. No, like family vacations and things. But that really gave me the travel bug. And, we did so many interesting things. We spent some time in Burma, which is difficult to get in and out of then, and really a wild experience. We trekked both in Nepal, a kind of 3 or 4 week trek up over the Annapurna range, like super, not technical climbing, but like, and then, we did the same in northern India near the Tibetan border. So we met crazy people along the way, and, it was just an experience of a lifetime.
Yes, I can hear it. And it sounds like an adventure like that. Well, first of all, being steeped in the culture, like on the ground, sorting things out, and it sharpens your survival skills, your sense of adventure, and your trust in yourself, and your trust in yourself and your teammates to like figure things out. But it also cures any ethnocentrism that might be, residual or otherwise. And to come away with a feeling of a more, I'm maybe projecting onto you, but did you feel more of a universal connection to humanity after being a guest in so many different cultures?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I was super into like Eastern religions and reading all about Buddhism and, and that was new to me. Like I'm also not a big reader, but, you got a lot of time on trains and on buses and, in guest houses and hostels and things. So I think it heightened all of our senses of just observation, right? Like just being tuned into what's around you and being really appreciating things that are overlooked, not the typical design things or art things, but, the more humble things that people make and create and just stuff you see. And I think that sensitivity or interest in sort of observing the world around you was really sparked during that trip and stayed with us, I'd say, through our lives. So I think it's probably the biggest value we got out of it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard you talk about that, like simple things like a manhole cover or, I don't know, thinking about my travels and, sometimes it'll be like a teacup or the
Right.
eave on a building. And I'm like, oh, we don't do it like that. And,
Right. Yeah, those things, right? Yeah.
Suburban United States, like that's really beautiful. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so then you did this consulting deal for 3 years and then got an MBA in marketing and strategy at Northwestern. So I want to move into the founding of Blu Dot, but what do you take from those years that's really foundational to the success of Blu Dot and your life?
Yeah, Bain was intense, but in a good way. I mean, they put us in situations that, we're in front of people presenting analysis or strategy on their businesses. And you're like 23 years old, and you're presenting to like a 45-year-old CEO. And I can't believe we were not laughed out of the room, or I was not laughed out of the room, I should say. I mean, honestly, like I knew nothing, and I could bullshit my way through it, to be honest. But, but I think, you develop a level of confidence or swagger as a result of being put in those situations. So like being forced into that kind of situation was good for me in terms of growing and like just feeling comfortable in those environments. It was rigorous. It was hard, lots of, all-nighters and working on the weekends and super sharp people that you're working for. So I learned a ton in 3 years. And I think my job anyways there, it was very much being an analyst, right? Like sort of sorting through data and trying to find insights and nuggets of valuable information that could guide a business one way or the other. I wouldn't experienced enough or knowledgeable enough to know like what the stuff meant necessarily, but I could crunch the numbers. And I think that serves you really well in business in your later years. Like, not obviously not every decision we make is driven by data, but there's lots of things to be learned by digging in and being curious and kind of poking at things. And I think that spirit of curiosity helped along for me at Bain. That's probably what I take away from it as being most valuable now.
Like the kind of data forensics of recognizing patterns and figuring out.
Exactly. Like what's buried in those numbers that needs to be unearthed that can actually lend some insight as to like how we should move forward, like that kind of thing. Like what if we looked at it by this way versus that way? And does that tell us anything differently?
Well, that helps me understand. And then the MBA what were you feeling? Like you wanted more equipment?
No, I think, I was yearning for something more creative. I didn't know what that looked like or what that was going to be. I somehow got this idea that being in the film business would be like a good combination of right brain, left brain for me. So with a friend, I left Bain and I moved out to LA and started kind of poking around out there. I lived on Venice Beach and started like interviewing and meeting folks. And just after maybe 4 or 5 months, realized like this is not my scene, just personally. And I'm not sure I'll get out of it what I was hoping I might get out of it. So I didn't know what to do next. I mean, I had saved up enough money, so I was fine without a job, but I needed to do something. And I think my folks were like, so how long are you going to live in LA, like on the beach? So I think really business school was like, well, shit, I'll do that. And that'll be a useful 2 years of my life and good to have in my resume, I guess. And I'll take those 2 years to figure out what's next.
And I'm guessing that was a pretty smart decision. You had an interest in business, but it helps to have an MBA if you're going to become an entrepreneur.
A little bit, I mean, I think it definitely helps when you're going to get a bank loan or,
Okay.
or you're looking for outside investors and they're wondering what your background is. I think there's an element of just building another network of great friends that go on to do really interesting things in their lives that you can that you stay connected to. So that was super fun. But I think in the end, like in terms of running a business, like, I use the analogy, you can't learn to ride a bike by reading about it. You got to jump on the bike, at some point. And that's the case. I think that's why I think we never really wrote a business plan. I think I knew enough to know that I'd rewrite it like a month in, because I didn't even know anything. So.
Got to iterate.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you were yearning for something more creative. You took these 2 years to get an MBA, developed a new network of friends. What's fomenting in your heart? Like what direction's pulling at you?
Well, I was lucky enough that my folks paid for my undergraduate education, and I made the wrong assumption that they would pay for my postgraduate education. And I remember calling my father to like, how are we going to handle this tuition? He's like, you're covering that. So my first couple of years out of business school was really about paying off my student loans. I couldn't really get on to the next chapter until I tackled that. So I was just like hell bent on doing everything I could to get that paid off in a short amount of time. But, I think our idea of devoting ourselves to something creative or having a life or a career that was centered around creativity, that started, I think, in our backpacking trip in Asia, where the three of us kind of spent a lot of time together and started having these conversations like, what would that look like? And how could we work together? And like, what would we do? What would that be about? And it was very vague in those stages. So, the three of us went off and did our own thing. I mean, in business school, Charlie and Maurice went to architecture school, graduate school for architecture. And I think after I got the loans paid off and I was getting a little antsy in my still a consulting job here, I reached out to them and said, look, I really want to pursue this sort of nugget of an idea. What do you guys think? And they were like, yeah, that's cool. Let's talk about it. And so again, pre-email, we started having kind of charrettes and discussions via fax and like kind of playing business in a way, like, dreaming up, like, what would this be? Would we sell only small things like decorative accessories? Would we sell big things like furniture? We knew it would be design and like home related things, but because we all had an interest there, sort of small architecture in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that went on for probably a year, and they would come up to Minneapolis here and there, and we would spend a weekend together and push it a little further. And then I got a little bit more serious, and then I just quit my job, and I faxed them or called them and said, all right, I've quit my job. I've saved up $50,000. I'm going to devote that and a year of my life to pushing this forward. Do you guys want to join in? And they were smart enough to say like, well, I don't want to quit my job, but we want to participate. Yeah. So that's how it got going. And then, a year later, it looked promising enough to keep going.
Okay. So that must have been like 1995, 96?
95, 96. Yeah. We launched in 97.
Yes. At ICFF.
Right.
So, but that's still kind of a fast timeline to come up with products and decide they're good enough for manufacture and then put them out in the world. So there must have been, even if Charlie and Maurice kept their day jobs, there must have been a fair amount of dedication.
Yeah, for sure. It was hard to figuring out how we were going to get things made because, we're not going to make them by hand. We wanted to make them, and our mission being sort of making design more democratic and a little bit more approachable and affordable. We knew that we needed machinery to achieve that. So researching that in those days was tricky because you had like the yellow pages,
Yeah,
you
or
couldn't
we had these
Google
big books, these trade books that had all the manufacturers in them, and they
the
were
Thomas Register.
yeah, the Thomas Register.
And I had a set of them in my office, the
Yeah.
big green books. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they would come to town and we would design kind of together. Each of us would have maybe a nugget of an idea or a somewhat fully fleshed idea. Had kind of a long roll of butcher paper on a long table in this little office studio that I had. And we'd sit across from each other and sketch and draw over one another, basically. I mean, that's the reason that none of the pieces that we design now, or any of the pieces in our collection, have a particular person's name on them, because we always, from the get-go, did it kind of as a group. And even though it might have come out of my sketchbook or Charlie's or Maurice's, in the end, it was kind of a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
But we started to build, we had maybe a collection of 15 or 20 things, and we deliberately made them go from a magazine rack all the way up to a pretty large shelving system we still sell called the Chicago 8-box, and everything in between. There was no upholstery. That was tricky for us. Didn't know anything about it. So it was all like, honestly, the things that we could probably prototype in my shop. I had a studio here.
Okay.
So it's things we could make on a table saw and a drill press and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then ICFF was rolling around and coming up, and we're like, should we do it? Like, I don't feel ready. Let's do it. Like, well, the worst that can happen, we'll just get feedback and see how it goes. So yeah, that was a scramble.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of always is.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. So you scrambled, you got a show together, and it was like, you got a lot of favorable response, correct?
Yeah, it was really favorably received. William Hamilton is a design critic for the New York Times at that time. Always highlights 3 or 4 designers. We were one of the 3 or 4 that year. So that felt like awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. And we took a bunch of orders, which we didn't expect. And we're like, yeah, we'll deliver in like 6 weeks. And like totally had no inventory. It was exhilarating though. We left there on cloud 9, like, holy cow, like our hunch was right. We've struck a nerve here. Like there is something real here. You can feel it. Now we got to go home and figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, you've made it happen because now, 28 years or so, like 28 plus years?
Yeah.
You've grown the company into an internationally acclaimed design brand with 17 retail locations across the US and Mexico and Australia, and a network of 50 independent retailers worldwide. You've also gotten a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. That was like 2018, right? For product design. So, I mean, these are major accomplishments, and Blu Dot is a model of not only like excellent, iconic, well-made, well-thought out design, but the business itself is a thriving example of this beautiful intersection of creativity and commerce, and a way to sort of think about business as not the enemy, but as the ultimate creative project. And if you design it right, then you can live inside of it very happily. At least that's what it looks like. And so
that's very nice. Yeah, I know.
Congratulations to you. But I have to imagine, it's not always smooth sailing. We know you've traversed many rough terrains, and business itself has been subject to supply chain issues with the pandemic. And of course, there's ebbs and flows and cycles that you go through. So my question would be for you is, if you're painting a picture for somebody who's embarking on a career as a designer, who has aspirations of the Blu Dot variety, what would you tell them about navigating through like the joys and tribulations, the stresses and the satisfaction?
Oh God, I don't know. We have another like 2 hours to chat, but I think I've likened it before to like a kitchen renovation project. Like, do your best to figure out what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, and then like triple it. I mean, it's hard, and that's not to say don't do it by any means, but I have great respect for, and it's also not to pat ourselves in the back, but I have great respect for anybody who starts and runs a business and keeps it running, because it's more challenging than I thought it would be, basically. And making a profit and sustaining this organism, over the years is a challenge. And we've had lots of near-death experiences and, over the years. But so if you're not totally into it and completely committed, it's just too easy to bail out. It would be too easy to quit, because there's plenty of opportunities along the way where you're like, wave the white towel. I'm done. I'm done.
Okay.
And again, I don't want that to sound like heroic. It's not. It's just that's the reason. I mean, because we love what we do, because we love making things and putting our creations out into the world that affect people in some small positive way. That's why I get up in the morning, right? And I don't want that to stop. Like, I think also when you, as an entrepreneur, once you get a taste of this, you never want to go work for somebody else again in your life. So, you're kind of screwed. You're like, this has got to work, because what else am I going to do?
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of that maybe compels you to keep going. But also, I think the biggest joy for us is the three of us didn't do this ourselves, right? I mean, we've had so many great people work with us over the years. Some don't work with us now that have moved on, and many that still work with us today. And it's a completely team effort. And I honestly marvel at it. And I've said this to the whole group here. It's crazy that it's so complicated. I mean, for what we do anyways, furniture, we design it, we engineer it, we create it. We're silly enough to decide to also sell it and market it and do all of it, right? I think we were so young and naive that we took it all on. The benefit of that is that we get to control all that, right? But to have a collection as large as ours is, make it at a high quality and consistency, inventory it, have it available for sale, sell it, it's so friggin' complicated. And I don't know how it doesn't collapse under its own weight, honestly, but it's like, it is like a symphony of contributions from so many people that are all playing their kind of instrument just the right way, where it all kind of comes together. And so that's the gratifying part, is to sit back and be somewhat of a conductor, I guess, but like just sort of hear that music get played and watch everybody do their part and watch it come together. It's super, super cool. It's been the most gratifying part.
Yeah, I can see that. And throughout your life, you've had these really important relationships, long-term relationships. And so I have to imagine that this culture, this symphonic culture, didn't happen by accident. And so part of the skill of the leadership at Blu Dot, you and your team members, is creating this culture that allows everyone to play their instrument to the best of their ability. And how do you do that? I ask, what's the creative process of creating that culture and supporting those relationships so that this whole thing can play the beautiful music?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important. And I remember being in business school, and we had to take a class called organizational behavior. It's basically psychology for business, for MBAs. And it seems squishy and soft. And all of us were like, why do we have to take this? And the professor was like, you guys are all going to think that, but this is going to be one of the most important classes you need to pay attention to. And culture is super important. I don't think we've recognized it or realized it until maybe 10 years in. We were also very small. So having core values or a culture when you're 15 people or 20 people just seems silly. But as the company started to grow and we got better at hiring folks and we were maturing as a company, it became clear that we needed to kind of pin down what we stood for and kind of how we wanted to show up in the world and how we wanted to show up for each other. And so that was our building kind of core values, like so many companies have. And I think in many places, everybody's got it pinned up in their cubicle, and whether or not the company lives them or not is another story. But I think we do. And I know that our folks do, my colleagues do for sure. Because, as a leader, the place, you can feel it, you can sense it. And I think when somebody's off base, not living those values, it shows up kind of pretty obviously. So it is, I think, our superpower. And I don't know how you'd run a company without a strong, healthy culture. It'd be really hard because you sort of don't have the fertile soil for stuff to take root in, or the foundation to build on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sort of descends into chaos where people, even if it doesn't look like complete chaos, people either don't feel ownership to take initiative, or they don't trust the leadership, so they do take initiative, but it's not all aligned. It's like everybody's sort of at cross purposes with each other.
Yeah, and we've learned it over the years. Even as us being leaders of the place, I always joke, I've never run a $150 million company until this year. I'm learning it. I'm learning it too. And so we're figuring this out as we go a little bit. So, we've all grown up, literally grown up, but also matured and learned just over the years. So it takes time. Like those things just take time to kind of marinate and develop.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I've noticed over the years is that when the world is dealt a blow, like a recession or a pandemic or even a slew of devastating wildfires, Blue Dot responds in some way, clever marketing campaign or some response to that. And it reminds us that there's caring humans at the helm who are actually participating in the same reality that all of the customers are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important, especially right now, to not descend into complete mistrust of all corporate entities.
Right.
But I also think that some of those fun, what I'm talking about is like swap meet and trash day, and the fact that you offered to replace any Blue Dot piece that was destroyed in the LA fires. And sorry, I'm from LA, so that touched me. That was I didn't suffer through the fires because I live in Rhode Island now, but so many of my friends and family were really traumatized by that experience. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I just really appreciate that there is a caring touch, and often it's a humorous sort of bit of levity that comes through from the company, but it just reminds us that there is, at its core, is the humanity that is running Blue Dot. So, but it also seems to me like it might be, I don't know, this is grit and grace, I think, coming through.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think a lot of it stems from, I think, a deep appreciation for our customers. Like, whether you buy a candlestick or a hotel's worth of furniture, like our customers allow us to continue to do what we love to do every day. We totally don't take that lightly. That's not a given. And we say that a lot here, like, especially being in this so long, like you live through these ups and downs, and there are periods where 4 or 5 years in a row, things are going great and you feel like a rock star, and I can kind of get a little cocky. Right. And then you get popped in the chin with COVID or with whatever. And you're like, oh, wait, like, none of this is for sure. I can't take this for granted. And I really need to appreciate like what we have. So the LA thing it's interesting when you lead a brand and things like that happen. The murder of George Floyd in our city is another example. Especially then, people were looking at brands to be like, what are you doing? Like, what's your stance? What are you saying? And we left the city. I mean, I was here the night that everything, the riots were happening. The city was kind of burning down. My family was up at our cabin in Wisconsin, and I joined them the next day. And there's a lot of pressure to post on Instagram, like, what are you doing? And I was reading all these other brands' posts, and they were saying all the great things they're doing for racial equity and da-da-da. And I don't know, honestly, it felt like bullshit to me. And we, as a company, had not done anything. Like it was on my agenda, right, to spend a little bit more time making sure that our hiring and our team reflected better the communities where we live and work. And we hadn't really devoted ourselves to that much. So I was struggling to figure out, like, what are we going to say? Because we really honestly couldn't say anything. And so that's what we said, basically, was, look, we could sit here and tell you all the great things that we're doing, but the truth is, like, we haven't done jack. And, here's what we vow to do and what we plan to do. And if you remember that environment, there was so much intensity in the sort of comment section of all those posts. And when we made that post, it was sort of like, people were like, well, thanks for telling us the truth, and it wasn't the truth, right? So, I mean, that's really all we could do in that stage. With LA, there's also pressure, I think, as a brand to, like, what are we going to do, right? Are we going to make our store a drop-off spot for stuff? Or are we going to invite people in to hang out and find a moment of respite or whatever? And that's all good, don't get me wrong, but it felt like too little. And it also felt like, in a way, it felt like marketing on the backs of this tragedy. I mean, I know that's not, folks that did offer that's not their intention, but it just felt a little too trivial to me. So I think, you do this long enough, you realize you have more time than you think. you don't have to respond tomorrow. And that's kind of what we did. We thought about it a little bit longer and said, what can we do that would be more meaningful? So, we've offered to replace anybody that bought Blu Dot in the last year that lost pieces in the fire, that we'll replace them for free. And of course, you need to check to see if you can afford to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not a small amount, but we can afford to do it. And, not everybody will need this all at the same time. And so it's like, oh, that's actually something that we can do that might be more meaningful. So, but it's a give and take, right? Our customers allow us to do what we love to do. So if we can give back in a more meaningful way, we will.
Well, thank you. And the care and the thoughtfulness that goes into it is evident in the even just in the way you're describing it and choosing your words, and the transparency is also really appreciated. I think so many people feel kind of vaguely gaslit by the marketing professionals who put out those responses, but it does take a thoughtful and intentional approach to kind of find the thing that works, that is authentic to who you are, so that when you are giving it as a gift, it is genuinely meaningful and people can receive it as such. And I think Blu Dot's really good at that. And I think that's probably a lot of that is you. So,
well, thank you. It's gratitude, really, fundamentally.
So, I mean, this has been a success story, I would say.
28 years success.
28 years
overnight success.
Outside of Blu Dot, what are the things that keep the whole train running? Like, how do you stay excited about life?
Oh, I've got awesome family, amazing, super interesting, amazing kids that are doing all sorts of great stuff.
Yeah.
That's a blast. My oldest son works with us here in business intelligence, data analytics. He's on the autism spectrum in a fairly mild way, and it's awesome to see him here and get to work together, which is super fun.
Hey, this is like the modern day version of the road trip to Rhode Island in the paneled station wagon,
right?
Yeah.
No cigarettes, but
are you drinking Stingers? Hopefully.
No Stingers. It's been a while since I've had a Stinger. Maybe I'll make one tonight. Then I have a son who graduated college and wants to be a stand-up comic and is in Chicago, pursuing that. And I think,
oh wow,
I think he thinks probably like I did when I started Blu Dot. I bet my parents don't think this is a legitimate pursuit, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. I send him stuff all the time that basically says go for it. You got to pay your rent, and you got to be an adult, but life's not a dress rehearsal. If that's what you want to do, get after it. But I think I'm so proud of him to put himself out there like that, which seems terrifying to me.
Oh my God, it's so courageous. And I believe it. Just to put yourself, oh my God, yeah, that's terrifying. Yeah. So if nothing else, if comedy doesn't end up being his passion for the rest of his life, the skills that he's learning in terms of the swagger that he's building, it's like your Bane. It's like he's putting himself in these situations and picking up these skills that are going to be transferable to whatever.
Yeah, totally. He calls it he's getting his reps in. He thinks of it like exercising kind of. And I think, and what's the worst that can happen, right? You switch gears at some point and do something else, but or you stick with it and it becomes your life's work. That could easily happen for him. Yeah. And then I have a daughter who's a senior in college, who's incredibly talented musician and singer and just a super cool girl. And then my youngest son is at Williams as a freshman.
What?
So,
wow.
Yeah. So I get to go back and spend time there. I'm super proud of him too.
Wow. Family reunions at your house must be pretty fun. They
are fun. They're the kids are they're funny and it's a good time for sure.
Nice. I guess this is my final question. What is it that people don't ask you that you want to share? Are there any hidden talents or things that people kind of get wrong about you that you can set straight?
No, I think you obviously know our world and know the design world. But I think often folks, because we are a business and because we have stores and because we have a brand, people forget that we're actually designers. Or, they put us in the same camp as a CB2 or a West Elm or whatnot. And we are in that world. We are substitutes for the good stuff that those folks make, but we're fundamentally different because we create everything ground up. 100% of what we sell, we make. And I don't think we do a great job of telling that story. In our stores, for sure, we don't tell that story well enough. Somebody coming into our store that didn't know us might think we're a design within reach and wouldn't know that everything they're looking at was created in this little studio outside my office here and prototyped in the workshop across the way. And so I think we need to do a better job of telling that story because I think people like to know like where their stuff came from.
Yeah.
And like to know that there's objects in their home have a story or a history. It's not just stuff. So that's kind of where I think, obviously, us, but I think sometimes people don't remember that or just don't even know it.
I see that, and I agree with that. And I wonder, so you deliberately don't put names on furniture. And then for the general consumer or even the design appreciator, sometimes the name is the way that we connect through to the humanity behind the piece.
Right.
And yet I really appreciate the collaborative dynamic that the pieces that are generated from Blu Dot are from this, let's say, family of designers that all contribute to it. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're getting lost in that because it's nameless.
It's not Philippe Stark or it's not, right.
Right. But that's one of your values. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the difference between the truly collaborative process that designs something that is with an inherently Blu Dot DNA versus this sort of diluted process of design by committee or design by consensus, because those are two very different things. And so how would you unpack the nuance between true collaboration and design by consensus?
I'm taking design by consensus to mean kind of watered down and lowest common denominator and everybody gets a say. And in the beginning, it was the three of us. So, and that was it, right? For probably the first 5 or 6 years, maybe. And then we brought people into the design studio and we have full-time designers that work here and have been with us for a long time, actually some more than 20 years. So,
wow.
So I guess we work maybe more like an architecture practice, right? Like Frank Gehry doesn't design every Frank Gehry building, but his office does. And Frank is in the charrettes and in the critiques and is shaping it and molding it and pushing it one direction or another. And that's kind of how we work. I mean, I think that's the role that we play now is more like creative director in a sense. Mm-hmm. We're not designing things occasionally, but not always designing things kind of ground up and throwing it into the process. And so, you'll hear if you were part of our critiques here, which happen every Thursday, like, I don't know if that's Blu Dot, like, is that Blu Dot or is that not Blu Dot? Like, but at the same time, where there's members of that group that push us, right? Like, a good example is a woman, Ashton Jones. She manages our overall product assortment. So she acts kind of like a merchant in a way. Says, here are all the things that we offer, but here are the things we're missing. And those are the things we're going to work on. She'll make a design brief and then the designers, we start working on that. She was really pushing us towards adding velvet to our upholstered offerings. And Maurice and I both were like not velvet people. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with velvet. It just wasn't our jam. And, so we were like, I don't know, man. I don't know if we can do velvet. And she's like, come on, you guys, like, let's try it. Of course, velvet's super successful. Lots of people love velvet. Actually, our pieces look really great with velvet on it. So the influence of others ends up pushing us in directions we wouldn't have gone on our own and makes us better. Like we just believe that the collective power is better than a singular power.
Yeah.
And I think for us, it was deliberate not to put our names on designs because we were trying to somewhat eschew the notion of a celebrity design or a heroic designer in a cape.
Yeah.
And especially the spirit of Blu Dot being more approachable and democratic and real, maybe. So that's why. But I think it does make people think of us more like a company than a designer because those things don't have designers' names attached to them.
That might be true. But when you look a little closer and you look at the response to world events and the way that even just your website is super transparent about all of your core values and the choices that you make and the process behind it and celebrating everyone who's participating and contributing to the process. The humanity really does come through. So, and I like to celebrate Blu Dot as this design-driven company with designers at the center, because for me, it feels like one of the reasons why the products become so iconic and last so long is because you're thinking of things all the way through from the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, we hope so. Not everything becomes iconic, but some of them do.
Get some out of the ballpark, sure. Hey, this is really fun. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with me. I've really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. I love your insights. It's fun to get other people's perspectives. So it's been a fun conversation. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. For a transcript of this episode and more about John and Blu Dot, including links and images, head to our website, cleverpodcast.com. While you're there, sign up for our free Substack newsletter, which includes news, announcements, and a bonus Q&A from our guests. If you like Clever, there are a number of ways you can support us. Share Clever with your friends, leave us a 5-star rating or a kind review, support our sponsors, and hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app so that our new episodes will turn up in your feed. We love to hear from you on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can find us at Clever Podcast, and you can find me at Amy Devers. Clever is hosted and produced by me, Amy Devers, with editing by Mark Zarowinski, production assistance from Ilana Nevins and Anushka Stefan, and music by L1011. Clever is a proud member of the Surround Podcast Network. Visit surroundpodcasts.com to discover more of the architecture and design industry's premier shows.
You never want to go work for somebody else again in your life. So, you're kind of screwed.